Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first week of visual storytelling. This week, we're just going to basically start with what is visual storytelling and why it's important, and really dive into thinking about how visuals go hand in hand with storytelling. And of course, you probably think to yourself, duh, I mean, we see this all the time, right? With videos, social media, just everyday life, seeing things. But what you may not know is that there are certain elements that go into visuals to really help guide the story and sometimes tell the story more than the actual text or audio of it. So, to begin with, um, I wanted to just take a look at some powerful pictures that we've seen in the last year or so and really think about what they mean as visuals to storytelling. The first one here is of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. Now, there were a myriad of pictures that you could have chose for this to look at and to analyze. Um, we saw tons and tons and tons of media regarding her funeral. One, she was the longest serving monarch to ever have served Great Britain. And two, she was just well loved. Um, Second, her son, who's in the picture, is the oldest monarch to take over. So I chose this one specifically because I wanted you to look at how the picture is formatted and framed, and what is in focus and what is not in focus. Okay, so you've looked at the picture, and what are some things you notice? One is that the casket and the pallbearers are not in focus. And this was done intentionally by the photographer, I would assume, because one, they weren't highlighting necessarily the queen at that point, but they're highlighting her children. And in this shot, you can see Charles and Anne, and then it cuts off some of her other children and grandchildren, but you specifically see Charles, who is going to be the next monarch or is the monarch currently, and his soul and face. You see that not only is he having to step up and become the new king of these countries, but he's also having to mourn his mother publicly at that time. And so I think it's important that they focused in on him. Second, they focused in on Anne, and Anne is the second oldest in line. And it wasn't until after her mother became the monarch that she changed the rule that women could, um, be princesses. They could be next in line to the throne if they weren't the first. Or if they had males after her. And so now Princess Charlotte and who is in line for the throne could become the queen if something were to happen. But at the time, Anne was not in that um ruling. So there's also that to think about. But it's also the fact that Anne was with her mother when she died, and she went with her in the casket everywhere she went, right? So that is a lot to think about in just one visual. But we won't spend the time on all of them like this, but I wanted the first one to kind of be impactful and to really break it down. Now let's look at this one. So, as most of you know, or should know, there is a writer's strike going on, as well as an actors guild strike, the SAG strike, and they are striking for a number of different things. Some of them being better pay. Some of them are striking to talk about rules regarding AI. Lots of different things are going on here. I liked this particular picture for two things, and I want you to kind of look at it before we talk about it. So one thing you might notice is that yes, it shows the Writers Guild of America on strike. These people are striking, but it also shows something significant in the background, and that is the entranceway to Walt Disney Studios in Burbank. And one of the interesting things about this picture and why this is significant is one, Walt Disney is one of the biggest media companies in the world, but two, Bob Iger was put on record to have saying, that these people need to get back to work, that, they're really kind of making a big deal out of nothing when he's this multi-billionaire. And these people sometimes are making minimum wage or less, depending on what they are striking for. And so there's a significance in a twofold way to that. And I think that the photographer noticed how significant this picture could be. All right, here is a fun picture to look at. So, if you have lived in a bubble for the last couple of months, you might not know that they have the new Barbie movie that has come out. And this is one of the promotional photos for it. And an interesting thing about the Barbie movie is that there was all of this hype around it, but no one really knew what the film was about. And if you haven't seen it, you still don't really know what it's about. But I liked this picture because it showed two things. And so I want you to look at it and then we'll talk about it. Okay. So one, of course, we see Barbie and Ken, and they're in their signature color, pink, right? But you're also seeing them leaving what we see as Barbie Land, and they're happy. Ken kind of looks a little concerned, and this has also become a meme at this point. And so not only is this visually representing part of the story and that they're going on an adventure, right? But it has lots of different things. It has the color, it has this, you know, look of adventure and happiness, wariness. Just a lot of different elements go into this. And this was not done on just like, oh, this is a promotional shot, we like it, but it was done purposefully because it shows lots of different things going on. Now, the last picture I have is from the fires in Maui, in Hawaii. And this, of course, shows a few different things, right? So we see a structure on fire, we see winds, we see destruction. And unlike some of the other ones that maybe were thought out a little more, this represents photojournalism at its finest because it's showing destruction, but it's still showing it in a very framed way. There's lots of leading lines, the color is there. And so, although this doesn't really, compared to the Barbie photo and the narrative there, this one is really trying just to compel how dangerous this is and the destruction that this is causing for the people. And so, as you see through all these different images, storytelling and visuals go hand in hand. And you may not think about them, but they are definitely purposeful in many ways. So, we'll be looking at a lot of different kind of pictures, videos, and different things throughout the semester, but this is just a little taste of how to start thinking about these things. Now, when we think about visual storytelling and narrative, there's kind of a working definition, and it changes depending on if you're talking about still photography versus video, versus it paired with text versus on different mediums. But basically, the idea is that this is a way to communicate and create slash imply meaning, right? We are creating a narrative of some sort, and we're trying to get that narrative across to an audience. Now, another way to think about it is an account of an event involving characters, a plot, discourse, and outcome. Now, if you think back to your middle school, high school English days, and you think about the concept of a story, so you have the beginning, right? The intro, you are introduced to characters, then a conflict is introduced. You rise with that conflict in action, it is settled, and then it falls, right? And then we go into an epilogue. So, um, that is like the working definition of a narrative, and that goes in hand with the visuals that go with it. We're going to talk a little bit about the history next week, but this is just kind of get you started on thinking about how visuals are so important when it comes to storytelling. Now, there's some variants in story, and they go hand in hand with a few different things. One of them is depending on the genre of the story, the visual narrative can change, right? So if you have news and information, such as the fire or the Queen's funeral photo that I showed earlier, it is a lot different than like the Barbie shot, right? Which is entertainment. And so the kind of story told will change how the visual narrative is shown. There's also what is called professional or style parameters. And basically, it's just how are you portraying the visual. If you look at Barbie Land versus Oppenheimer, which has been a big meme since they've come out, you know, Barbie is very pink and it's very bubbly and everything's happy, as do the previews say. And then there's Oppenheimer, which is about the atomic bomb, and it's very dark, it's very gritty, it's very Christopher Nolan style, who also did, um, you know, like the Batman trilogy. And so there's a style to it, right? There's also different angles and cropping and tones and colors that people put into the way that they select different visuals to create the narrative. And so you have genre, you have style parameters, but then you also have audience, right? Um, the Barbie audience is a lot different than the Oppenheimer audience when you think about that. The audience for the Queen's funeral was a lot different than those, right? One is news, one is entertainment. When you think about the entertainment, one is happy, one is a narrative about something that's happened that was very dark. And so when you come up with not only a story idea, but the way that you present it, your audience plays a big part in that. And we see that a lot, not only with news and entertainment, but we see it in social media a lot, right? So when you think about TikTok or Instagram and the way that influencers or brands use visuals to connect with their audience, there's lots of thought that goes into that. And then last, we have media economics, which is a lot of different things rolled into one. So it includes like trade and business strategy, how things are priced, how you versus the competition looks, industrial entities. All of these things have an impact on the way that we look at media. So think about the photo of the strike. They could have chosen lots of different ways to represent that, hey, this is a writer strike, this is an actor strike, this is what's going on, but they chose to highlight the fact that they were in front of Walt Disney Studios, um again, because they are a big media firm. They do lots of international things, they do lots of you know, movies in different areas and different genres for different audiences. And so it says a lot about the fact that they were in front of that company specifically. All right. When you think about a story, whether it be text or audio, or visual or both, it depends on a few things. One of them is the uniqueness or the foreignness of it. So, has this been told before? If it has, how can you make it different? Is it something new and exciting? Are you redoing something? So, you have to think about, how is this going to intrigue my audience? Then there's also proximity. So, what is significant about this story or this visual right now in time? Or if you look at something that's older, why is it important, and why was it important that we document it? There's also this idea of celebrity, right? We are all obsessed with celebrities, whether you think you aren't or not. There's some that you follow. And about that is that there's something about these people or these stories that we want to follow, we want to know more about. So think about like the Elvis movie that came out a few years ago. It blew up not only because of the unique storytelling aspect and visuals of the movie, but the fact that everyone loves Elvis, everyone wants to know more about his story, right? Then you have conflict. You always wanna have some kind of conflict, and that doesn't mean that it needs to be something bad, it just needs to be that there's something there that, brings your audience in, right? So the conflict could be a story element, good versus evil. It could also just be, the conflict of color, so that would be contrast, right? So black and white, or gritty versus bright pink like Barbie and Oppenheimer. Then you have issue relevance. How is the story tied up in a bow? And your image needs to be tied up in a bow as well, or your video or whatever. It has to have some kind of conclusion to it. So you can gain knowledge from it. Finally, when you think about visual storytelling, there's a few key concepts that go hand in hand with narrative theory. And so, narrative theory is basically the idea that humans as a species are storytellers. That's how we portray information, right? Um, Walter Fisher, who is a narrative theorist, also called humans homo narratives, right? Because it's just in our nature to tell a story. And you have some people that tell stories better than others. But some of the things that go hand in hand with visuals that go with narrative theory are as follow. So you have plot and structure, and we've talked a lot about that kind of leading up to this, that you have to have some kind of plot. Excuse me, some kind of plot. Usually there's three acts, right? The beginning, the middle, and the end. And without the plot and the structure, you really don't have anything. Even when it is a news type of situation, there is a story and a plot that goes with the image. You also have characters. What is the subject of your story or your visual? Why do people need to listen? Why do they need to look at this? What are you trying to express? Then you're gonna have other visual elements, and we'll talk a lot about their impact in this class. So you have composition, framing, lighting, color, and other types of visual things that portray different emotions or themes or symbols. So all of this is very important when it comes to storytelling, especially with visuals. Then you have the editing process. The way that people edit stories, whether through text or visuals, really changes the way that your audience perceives it. And so you have to be careful of that and be wary of how you're editing it, because editing is very powerful. You guys also have point of view and perspective. Um, we talked again, when you think about the Queen's funeral photo, lots of different perspectives they could have gone with, right? But they chose to blur out the actual coffin and focus on her children. And so that point of view changes how you look at the picture. There's also symbolism and imagery. You saw that in the Barbie, photo, right? The pinks, the narrative, how it represents things, what the movie might be about, the motif, right? And so that has a visual impact. The symbolism and imagery in the Disney writer's strike one, again, very important. And so these are a few things. Some more of them, theme and message. What is the message that you're trying to communicate, and how are you going to do that is very important. You also have audience engagement. You can have a visual and a story, but if you have no one to tell it to and no one to express it to, then what is it? It's just there. Then you have transmedia storytelling, which means that storytelling can extend beyond just the oral or textual story. You have lots of different ways to get that across through lots of different mediums. And then last but not least, there's cinema techniques. And that can include, the things that we talked about, like composition, but it also includes style, it includes perspective, all these different things wrapped up into one. So this is just a small um, taste of what visual storytelling is and some of the things that we're going to be talking about this semester. So think about how this all plays together and get ready to delve deeper into that starting next week.